It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Peter Schuerman. Peter has over 20 years experience in business development across a wide spectrum of technology, including biotech, pharmaceuticals, nanotechnology, chemistry, and engineering. Peter was the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development at UC Merced, where he developed a number of programs to enhance the university's ability to partner with industry. He was also the founder and a director of the Office of Business Development, where the office hosts the UC Merced Venture Lab Network. The Venture Lab program is geared toward helping new startups in assessing their market potential by identifying potential customers, looking at business models, and developing go-to-market strategies. One thing that's really unique about this program is that the support is done with access to a wide array of mentors, consultants, both established companies and other new ventures, a network that went way beyond the California Central Valley. Peter, the floor is yours. I believe you can share slides.
Very good. Well, thank you. And I just want to make sure I'm unmuted. Okay, very good. Grace, thank you very much. Also, thanks to Kara and Anya for putting this on. And also I want to highlight, when the work at UC Merced, we launched a business incubator for the university, the UC Merced Venture Lab. And you are very fortunate to have there at University of Nevada, Reno, Kara O'Hara, because she was a co-founder of that program. So she did a lot. We raised $3 million of funding for making a kind of a big splash there in the Central Valley. So a great asset for you all there at UNR. So today I want to reflect on something that you probably hear a lot about, which is, who's your customer? What do you know about your customer? What's your engagement with the market? Customer discovery is a cornerstone of understanding, how you can work with people. And I had this very fortunate opportunity when I worked as the director of licensing and intellectual property for Texas A&M to work side by side with a really preeminent angel investor. His name is Jamie Rhodes. And he came in as a director of new ventures. And I saw him in action and I said to him, "Hey, Jamie, how do you make investment decisions?" And he said, "Peter, I would love to tell you, but I don't know how to explain it." And what I've found is that a lot of investors can explain or try to explain what it is, but it's difficult. And so what I did is I got Jamie to stand in front of a whiteboard with me, and we spent some time together doing customer discovery. And I was able to distill from that a model, and that's what I'm excited to share with you today, is a model for understanding what investors are looking for. But just like any good customer discovery, you don't just stop at one interview. So what I did is I went to the Angel Capital Association meetings and I would talk to angel investors and I would say, "So how do you make decisions?" And then they would struggle to tell me how they did it. Maybe some of you have talked to investors and found them struggling to tell you how they make decisions. But then I would show them the model and I would say, "How does this look? Is this essentially what you're talking about?" And literally every single time, and I continue to do this, the answer is, "Oh yeah, that's actually a really good way to say it." So here you're getting the benefit of my customer discovery for investors. And when you see the logic of it, I think it gets very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off by sharing my slides. And Grace is going to be monitoring the chat for any burning questions, but if we don't get to them at the right away, we will certainly do it at the end. So understanding the investor mindset. Here's a quick overview of what I want to get across, is that investors are trying to find people that they like, that they can trust, and who have an opportunity, an investment opportunity that will work for them. So that's a very quick way to describe it. But to get into more detail, we're going to spend some time looking at the startup investors' hierarchy of needs. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can frame your pitch with an understanding of this, and then how you can optimize it. So my goal for you today is to kind of open your eyes to some really different ways of thinking about how you can present your company and how you can even build your company so that it's investable. And what I would say also is that even if you've decided I don't need investment, still you should make an investable company, because you, by putting your life energy into that company, are also an investor. So don't you think it's worth it for your company to be the kind of thing that you should be investing your time in? So one of the big misconceptions that we need to tackle is the role of venture investors. So here's what you would typically hear is someone saying, oh, well, angels are there to help companies at an early stage, and then VCs come in later to help you when you need more money. And angel investors and VCs would both say, you don't know what you're talking about. We're not here for that. So what are investors looking for? They're looking for a return on investment, and it has to be something that's feasible. So they're looking at, is this someone that they feel like an affinity with? In other words, is this someone that they like? It doesn't mean that you have the same hobbies and that sort of thing. It means more like, yeah, I like what you're doing. I like the way you think. I like your approach. I like you. I can feel this kind of connection. I worked with a postdoc many years ago who was struggling with this. We had lunch together, and finally he had this epiphany. He said, oh, I get it, Peter. What you're saying is with investors, it's their money. So they're the ones who decide whether or not they're going to invest. And I'm like, absolutely, yes, you did it. So the thing is, they have to like what you're talking about, and they have to like you to invest. They also are looking for people that they can trust. And ultimately, it has to be something that's going to work for them. So if they're investing in biotech and you have a nanotech company, then it's probably not going to work for them. So understanding that kind of alignment is important as well. So how do investors decide what is interesting to them? It can be broken down into these 5 things. First of all, values. Do you share the same types of values as them? That's one of the first things they're trying to figure out. They also want to know if the startup has people who are going to work well together. It's a good team. And they also want to know if you have really understood the market. Like is it something that are you pushing a rope, or is there some market pull? They also want to know that what the company is trying to do is actually feasible, that there's a good plan for achieving that. And also, innovation is a campaign. You're trying to get somewhere, but then once you get there, you have to hold that space. You have to occupy it. So it's not enough to climb the mountain. You also have to figure out how you live there. So when I was working with Jamie, I realized that he was able to he said that some things were more important than others. And so this made me think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, this is a psychological model that says, look, for you to achieve self-actualization in your life, there's other needs that have to be taken care of first. So for instance, it's very difficult to think about your purpose in life and how you could achieve what it is you want to do with your time on Earth when you're starving. Right? So physiological needs sort of have to be taken care of first before safety needs, and then safety needs have to be taken care of before social needs. So these ones here at the bottom are more fundamental, because if they're not being taken care of, it's a bigger problem. So in talking with Jamie, we arrived at this model, which I'm going to step through. And there's a link there if you want to see a blog post that I created about this. But this is the blueprint for an investable company. Like, if you can do this, you will be able to get attention from the kinds of investors who are aligned with what it, with what kind of investment opportunity you're giving them. So we're going to step through this. The first one is mindset. So this really surprised me when Jamie said that this was more important than, for instance, technology. Because I was in the intellectual property and licensing business, and my world revolved around that. But here Jamie was saying the mindset of the people in the startup was really important. Now, as we go through this, there's a reason why. There's something about the things that are lower on this hierarchy, and there's something about things that are higher on it. There's a gradient, and I'm gonna see if anyone can figure out why angel investors or VCs would care more about and be more concerned with these things being, why they would consider these things fundamental. We'll talk about that at the end, but just as we're going through this, see if you can think about why these types of things are at the bottom and these other things are at the top. So the mindset that investors are concerned with is what we could call in psychology a fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset would be, look how much work I have already done, and now I am here to be rewarded for it. So this is a very common mindset for an employee. Hey boss, I worked all month and now I would like a paycheck. Or a student, hey, I did my homework, now I would like to get a grade. But approaching an investor with that mindset is the wrong approach, because as an investor, you're not concerned with all the work. That's just happened in the past. That just brought us to this conversation. What the investor wants to do is talk with people who have an understanding that the focus has to be on creating value in the future. The team has to be a solid team. And a team is more than just the people inside the team, but it's also the way that it engages in team play with others. And so we'll go into a little more detail. So a complete team doesn't have to be 3 people, but there's 3 ways of thinking that all have to be coordinated and have to come together and work together. So to illustrate, I would typically, when I meet an entrepreneur who is starting a tech company, they tend to be in this, what we could call the CTO mindset. The CTO mindset is very focused on what is possible. And that's an important mindset, but it's not the only mindset that we need in order to succeed. We also need what we call a chief marketing officer mindset. So someone on the team has to be showing up to say, let's think about what the customers want. In other words, what is needed? And what is needed and what is possible are 2 really different ways of thinking. They don't tend to be something you can do at the same time, and they only rarely occur in the same people. So people who are awesome at answering the question, well, would it be possible to do this, are often struggle quite a bit with the question, well, what is it that would really make a difference to people? Now, programs that it's very common for incubator and accelerator programs to try to teach people how to spend more time in this CMO mindset. And that's great. That's exactly what needs to happen. But so you really have 2 choices. Either you can have an educational experience, an experiential learning opportunity where you do this, where you go and talk to customers, potential customers, and you discover what they need. And you can either say, hey, I've become really good at this, and this is something I want to focus on. Or you can say, oh, this is really hard, but now I see why it's valuable. And you can find somebody else who's good at this. I have often talked to professors who were very much in this technical mindset on the left. And when they think about starting a company, they say, well, maybe on top of my PhD, I need to go get an MBA. And so certainly that's an option. But you could also consider working with someone who has an MBA. There's the saying that you can go fast by yourself, but you can go far with others. And so sometimes it feels like the job is to go fast, but ultimately innovation is a campaign. You want to be able to go far. Now, these two different mindsets, chief technology officer mindset, what's possible, and chief marketing officer mindset, which is what is needed, because they can be a little bit like oil and water, because they don't always mix. People don't always see eye to eye. Maybe you could even say they're a little bit allergic to each other. The third type of thinking is this executive thinking, which harmonizes these. So executive thinking is political thinking. Executive thinking means, how do people who are different all feel like they are part of the same thing? It's what happens when people are successful politically in any organization or even in government, is that people feel like they're included. They feel like their differences are respected. They feel like they can be who they are, but still be a part of something. And so that's what a CEO ultimately has to do within their organization. The first challenge of a CEO in a startup is to figure out how to do this. And it could be that two people do this and one person is thinking, in two of these spheres. It could be there's 6 people, but they figure out how to divide it all up. It doesn't matter. It's just all these kinds of thinking have to be occurring in the startup. And the startup also has to be able to work well with others. No one is going to be able to achieve everything that they want to achieve unless they can work well with other organizations that as partners. And so figuring that out as well is something that a CEO has to do, but they have to do it after they've figured out how everything inside is stable. So that's the team. And then there's market engagement. And so and this is why you need the team, because now you need to have someone who's thinking about in that chief marketing officer mindset to engage in this level of the hierarchy. That someone has to think about how you can rock the world of your customer. This is not about going out and getting someone to tell you that you've got a good idea. This is about getting someone to tell you what it is they want and you figuring out, what's the delta, what's the difference between what you are offering and what they really need. So this is something investors want to see, that you've come up with some sort of remarkable insight into what the market needs. Then the chief technology officer, someone who's operating this way in a startup, has to understand technology, but they also have to understand that technology never goes to market. Like we have products that are enabled by technology, but no one buys technology. People buy products. And so a product is what happens when technology is mixed together with market engagement. So this level of the pyramid sits on top of market engagement. It only can exist if they've got market engagement. And then finally, the CEO's job is to position things. So they position the members of their company with respect to each other, so that they are all in the appropriate position. That no one's feeling like someone's better than the other, but everyone's recognized socially. There's a social positioning. There's also intellectual property positioning. One of the best ways to think about intellectual property is that it obtains a position on the innovation landscape. It's a way of buying property that you're going to build your business on. So a lot of things that are true about actual property can be ported over and are analogous in the world of intellectual property. So CEO is responsible for making sure that we've got a good intellectual property position. That's not the job, for instance, of a chief technology officer, because chief technology officer probably just wants to have lots of intellectual property rather than the right intellectual property. And then finally, the CEO is responsible for positioning with respect to other entities, figuring out what that relationship needs to be. So the whole package, the thing that's going to make an investor delighted is they're going to say, man, this team They are forward thinking. They've got the right people doing the right things. They've really understood the market. They have got a great solution, and they are positioned for success. Now, this is what most startups that and when they first come to me, they're like, hey, I've got a cool technology. We've just filed a patent, and now I need you to introduce me to some investors. And then what I will have to say is, I would love to introduce you to some investors, but I would also like for those investors to be able to, in the future, return my phone calls. And if I introduce you to them right now where you are, that might not happen in the future for me. So I want to get you ready for having a conversation with an investor. And then, because it's not always the case that people have the whole package. So on the left, you have, someone who has maybe a patent and has developed a product, but hasn't really, filled out the team, hasn't really talked to customers, and maybe has some problems with mindset. On the right, you have someone who's like, yep, we're forward thinking. We've got an amazing team. We understand the problem. We're still working on exactly how to solve it. Interestingly, a company like the one on the right is much more likely to get investment, even without a technology. And I've seen companies who just had an exquisite understanding of the problem and had a plan for how they were going to create a product, get investment. So this is sometimes surprising to people who are very focused on technology and intellectual property. So I'm going to check in, just have any questions popped up? Because this would be a good time to pause in case there have been some.
Yeah, Peter, actually, I do have a question. This is Grace. If you go back to that slide of the two triangles, this is very interesting, because if you think about a university trying to license their technology or spin off a company, we are often on the left. In fact, yes, we're always on the left. We have technology, we have IP, maybe we have a CEO, maybe not. And what we're trying to do is actually moving down by having program to help entrepreneur understand the market. This is why we are pursuing like the NSF I-Corp program, doing customer discovery. And then maybe we'll have a team, and mindset is not even there. So could you just comment a little bit about that? Because university is definitely on the left.
Right. So well said, exactly right. And the nice thing about this blueprint is you don't have to build it from the bottom up. You just have to build it. Now, it's easier to build things from the ground up, but you can also build things. You could make a house by first putting a roof up and then dropping some walls down and then it would just be, it's a little trickier, right? But if it's an exciting opportunity, it might be worth doing it. So I would say don't give up if we don't have the whole thing. But what I want to convey with this is that it's not realistic to go to an investor, for instance, with the mindset of like, look how hard we've worked to create this technology, and look, we've got a patent. So can you like support our work? Because right, angel investors and VCs are not there to support work. And Grace, I think one of the biggest challenges is getting out of the comfort zone, because in academia, there's so many ways that academic programs can be supported. There are funding agencies that are dedicated to supporting these things, right? To supporting any academic effort, research programs, and so forth. It's just, this is a different world, right? Outside of academia, this is not about someone supporting the work. Even the SBIR programs are trying to sort of start with a grant making premise and then kind of back into being investors. In fact, the SBIR program, STTR program, describes themselves as the nation's largest angel investment program, which is partially true. I would say partially true. So I would say don't give up, but this is like the logic of programs like yours and other incubators and accelerators is let's do market engagement. So yes, we're starting at this position with intellectual property. We're starting with a concept for a product, and then we're working downward, right? So you can do that. That's fine. It's probably something that needs to be tackled by a big institution like a university. If you're doing this on your own, you should do it from the bottom up. It's just much easier. But the thing that I would say is just as important as it is to teach people how to talk to customers about what they really need, it's to really, as soon as possible, think about mindset. And I've had a lot of people come to me and say, Dr. Schuerman, here's my idea. Like, what do you think? And my answer is always, it doesn't matter, because I'm not your customer, right? So I'm not here to reward you for the work you did. And that's, of course, very common, right? For someone in an academic institution to say, to bring to the relationship with me, I'm the student, you're the teacher. But angel investors are not teachers. Not good ones are not. And angel investors are, or VCs, they're not teachers, they're not parents, right? They are trying to find someone to partner with. And I'll just add one other thing here. I had this experience with a billionaire. I won't talk about what institution I was with, but this billionaire came to the university research program and said, I want to partner with you. And all the folks in the university could do is say, hey, how can we pitch you a proposal so you'll fund it? And they kept doing this. And he finally said, I don't know why you keep doing this to me. And they said, well, we thought this would be a good way to kick things off. And he said, I want to partner with you. And they said, so isn't that partnering for you to support our program? And they said, no, you don't understand. Partners don't pay each other. They help each other get paid. So what you're doing when you're building a startup is you're coming to an investor and say, hey, look what I made. I think I could help you make some money. And I think if you work with me, I would make some money too. Like we could make money together. So your sweat that you put into creating the company becomes your investment. And then now you're looking for a co-investment, not someone who's just like, oh, I like you. I like your haircut. I'm gonna write you a check. Any other questions before I go on?
So there is a question from Jeremy Smith. I understand your statement that the future of a company is often more appealing to the investor. However, we're running into a lot of the what are your sales type of question and give me your operational data proving type of questions. How should these type of questions or requests be responded, and when there is little evidence during the startup stage?
Jeremy, awesome question. I'm so glad you asked that, because it's one of these more esoteric but really important points. Okay, so remember I said investors are not teachers. Okay, they're not really. If an investor is asking you questions like that, that's just a way to say no. So in other words, what they're trying to do is coach you. They're like saying, hey, if you were doing these things, then you probably would be doing all the things I'd be interested in. So, but there are companies that get investment all the time that don't have any of that data. So rather than them saying, yeah, I don't like this investment opportunity, they're trying to be helpful. And they're trying to give you some advice. And they're trying to say, hey, try to look more like a business so that maybe we can have a conversation. So it doesn't mean that's like they're not really teaching you what they want. Exactly what they're doing is trying to coach you on how to do your business. Because there are companies that are like, yeah, we haven't sold anything, and they get investment. Why? Because they've got lots of green in their model, right, from the bottom up. So that's, just understand that just because they're saying that, that's not actually what they're trying to say. What they're trying to say is, there's some problems here. I can't put my finger on it, but probably if you were actually selling stuff, you will have sorted it all out. Jeremy, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I appreciate that viewpoint.
Good. Thanks for asking that. Any other questions?
And we're good for now.
Okay. So framing your pitch. So there's different ways that people often fall down, even when you've got a great company. You got a great story to tell. But like, how are you going to tell it? So what happens is that we can fall into these habits of communication, which can be quite a problem. So sometimes people are like, I'm going to create this pitch and I'm going to educate you. Like, I'm going to teach you about this company. The problem with teaching someone is that it assumes that the other person is wanting to be a student. Now, in a classroom, people have already opted in. They're like, yep, I'm here for a class. But if you go talk to someone who hasn't opted in for a class, you can really annoy them by deciding to educate them. And then when they don't, what I've seen is people who are educating investors, and the investors start saying, well, why don't you come back after you've gotten some sales under your belt? And then the person can say, oh, well, maybe you don't understand. Let me explain this a little harder or a little better. And the thing is, no, it's the problem is that you're trying to educate. So instead of trying to educate someone, just try to describe the vision. You say, hey, this is where we could be together. We could arrive at a place where there's commercial success and we both made money. Like that's exciting. And if you're talking about a particular type of company, like a biomedical company or social equity type of company or something like that, talk about that if that's the kind of thing the investor is looking for. The other thing is people will use conversion as their model. So it's almost like, I've seen the light. This is the way of the future. And now you have to see the light too. And I'm going to show you. And this is kind of like education, but it's worse. So, and again, if someone's like, hey, I'm coming to this meeting with this startup because I want them to change my life. And I want them to show me the error of my ways and how I have never seen the truth before, then yeah, that's the right approach. But since that's typically not what a good angel investor or VC is there for, is to be converted to something, become a true believer, don't do it. Just don't do it. Use instead a narrative structure. And that's a whole topic on itself, but narrative is a way to involve audiences so they can start to see themselves in what you're talking about. And there's lots of ways that you can start investigating that. It's a topic I love to chat with people about. So feel free to drop me a line if that's something you'd like to explore more. I also have some approaches to constructing pitch decks that have kind of this narrative structure baked in. So it's a whole other topic, but it's one worth considering and knowing about. Finally, people sometimes approach a pitch like a report. Like, here is all the things we have figured out. Like, I'm just going to lay all the facts out for you, and it's your job to kind of assemble it all in your head to see what the opportunity is. But that's also not effective because, people will be polite, but at the end of it, they won't really be moved. So what you want to do is show how you will get there. So you can see on the right here, it's like, describe the vision. Like, where are we going? Where could we go today? And then the narrative structure is like, here's the way that we could arrive at that. And then showing specifically, like, so here's the plan. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. This with your help, we'll be able to do all these things. We're going to arrive at there. We're going to arrive at the destination, and we're going to change the world, right? We're going to achieve our goal. We're going to create the value. So again, people tend to because how much time have you all spent in school? I spent a lot of time in school. You learn a lot of communication habits, which are very really just not the right approach. You don't want to be an educator. You don't want to be just reporting stuff. And then you also, sometimes we see a lot of people, succeeding because they're just like these heavy salespeople, and they're just like, hallelujah, check this out. Like this is life-changing. Like there's a much more direct way, which is just tell the story, show people where you're going and how you're going to get there. So I mentioned a little bit about pitch decks. So a lot of times people think of a pitch deck as like, okay, how do I get through this? like I have 10 slides, I got to squeeze everything in, and then I just got to get through it, and then something will happen at the end. If I get an A on my presentation, maybe that's a check. And honestly, there's a challenge here, because there are checks you can get for giving a great presentation, but they're not from investors. They're usually from someone giving some sort of award for, like in a pitch competition. But what will get you a check in a pitch competition is not necessarily, it could be, but it's not necessarily what's going to get you investment. So what you want to do is think about every slide in your deck as valuable real estate. It has a main message plus subsidiary messages, right? So there's things that we can communicate in parallel with the main message. And so going back to what we talked about earlier, values, people, desirability, feasibility, and viability, which is, if you think about it, are those levels of the hierarchy that we talked about. They relate to that. Can you, on your deck about the problem you're solving, show that, for instance, you have a great team? Can you talk about, hey, I just want to say to, Francine went out there, she talked to hundreds of potential customers about this. It was amazing what the insights she came back with. We were all really surprised when she came back and told us this. And at first we were all shocked, but at the end of the day, we were like, it's undeniable that she's right. So now you've just talked about an experience you had as a team working together at the same time that you've been talking about the problem you've decided to solve, right? So now you can overdo it, like don't do too much of this, but you can use this to good effect in your slide deck so that it is not just a recitation of facts. So we've talked about liking, trusting, and working, right? So an investor is going to I like these people because they're respecting my time, they're bringing me something that's fully baked. I trust them because they're showing me that they care about the same things that I do, and this is going to work for me because this is the type of investment opportunity that I'm looking for. They aren't bringing me something that is completely off base. We talked about the startup investors hierarchy of needs. It's a quick way to just go and check. You can ask yourself questions. How are we doing on this level? How are we doing on this level? And you can build, as we talked about earlier, you can build from the middle out. You can build from the top down, the bottom up. It's just make sure that you build it. And then we talked about framing your pitch, the ways that we can communicate, not giving a lecture, not trying to give a sermon, and not just giving a report, but actually telling a story. And we talked about how, while you're telling the story, look for those opportunities to make it personal, but also communicate other things that investors are looking to hear from your pitch. So that's we're at the Q&A part. Any questions? Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you about this.
So feel free to either put questions in the chat, or you can go ahead, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, I've got the chat screen up in front of me, but either way is fine.
Hey, Peter, this is Jeremiah again here. So going back, I guess expounding a little bit about your initial response and then more about what you said here. Are you suggesting that possibly if you're finding yourself in front of a potential investor like a VC and they don't understand your technology, or you find yourself in a position to where you're having to explain your vision, like how that's even possible? Is that just a cue that you don't that it's not your right investor, or is it a cue that you've done something wrong for a potentially right investor?
Great question. I'd have to say, just based on what you told me, it would be difficult to know, but let's talk about both of those possibilities. If you're trying to explain your technology to someone who's an investor, you probably are way off the rails because they're not investing in technology. And like I deliberately crossed that off. They're not interested in technology. They're not interested in how it works. What they're interested in is alignment between a proposed product and customer needs. So in other words, what do customers want? How are we going to deliver it? Like, how can we make the thing that they need? So yeah, and if you love technology and it's your comfort zone to talk about it, very, very common to say, let me tell you how we're getting the ions to do what we want them to do. That's just a different presentation. Let them, if they want to know that, they'll ask. So that would be one thing is if you are trying to explain something and you're saying, oh, they're not understanding it. Recognize that them understanding it isn't the problem. Like, it's never the problem. Like, oh, I don't understand this, is not the problem. It's not their problem. What you want to do is help them understand the opportunity. And the opportunity includes the technology, but only as it's implemented as a product. So, and this is a particularly challenging thing for people who are like, I've got a platform technology, because they haven't really figured out what their product is yet. So they want to talk about their technology, but investors are wanting to talk about product. Then the other thing is that if you are talking to them about, say, like a software startup, and they're just like, I don't understand the cloud. Yeah, then I would say you probably are talking to the wrong type of investor, because you want to find someone who's like got a comfort level. And this is, you know, as I said earlier, there's a gradient from top to bottom. And there's a reason why the things at the bottom are at the bottom and the things at the top are at the top. It's because what's at the bottom is hard to change. What's at the top is easier. Like, you can always reposition. You can always file a different patent. You can always develop a new product, but it's a little harder. Market engagement, you can always go look for another market, but it's, you know, but people want what they want. You can't just change that. Team, you can always do some shuffling around your team, but right, there's a lot of egos involved. There's people who will have stake in the startup. So that becomes constraining. And then mindset, well, it's super hard to change because people are the way they are. So the angel investor is actually ranking these things because they're going like, well, I know, you know, for me to invest in this, I want to add some value. And if all the problems are at the bottom of the hierarchy, they're like, whew, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work. But if they're at the top, they're like, okay, I can work with this. You see, does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, we have a question from Larry Bourgeat. Who are and what are the characteristics of universities who are highly effective at partnering with investors?
Okay, so universities because a university has lots of things, right? So there's, for instance, the research enterprise. This is all the faculty doing research projects. And then there are programs like yours, Grace, that are about, that are very different. So could I get a clarification on which part of the university we're talking about?
Sure, I'm talking up at the Vice President for Research and at Grace's level of the services that the universities provide that form the fabric that allow individual researchers to be highly effective. Got it.
So I used to tell people, I said, I got $100 bet. If you can get money out of money out of an investor to support research, like here's this $100 is yours, right? Like, here we go. And I've never had to give up that $100, right? Because if a venture capitalist came to a university and said, I really like this research, I think we want to go ahead and put some of our money into this research program, they would be sued by all of their investors, right? Because venture capitalist is looking after the investments of all of their their investors, all the limited partners. So because limited partners said, hey, I'm giving you this money to invest in companies, and if you use it for something else, I'm going to be really mad. In fact, they would put the call out, and then no one would give them the money. So it's just a non-starter. Now, angels, I've actually seen angels put a little money into research. It looks like this. They talk to the professor, and the professor says, yeah, I just need to build a prototype. And so, oh, how much is that going to cost? $10,000. Like, okay, so yeah, that might happen, something like that. But there's a fundamental mismatch, but that's an angel investor. It's their money. They can do whatever they want with it. Not really investing so much as speculating, like they're like, maybe this creates an investment opportunity. It's like they're paying for the development of an opportunity that they might want to invest in. So purely as investors, the research side of the university doesn't really have anything for them. The only way that investors are going to get interested in universities is if they are a way of learning about exciting new startups. And so when you ask who's really good at that, it not only I'm not, which universities are doing well. I'd say it's hard to say who's doing well because it really depends a lot on the personality of the person, but any university that understands what I just said and stops trying to get investors to fund their research is already ahead of the game.
Yeah, the other thing I've experienced is that the universities have a much longer time scale of development than a lot of investors are willing to interact with. And how do you at a VPR level get researchers to think on a quarter scale rather than a 5-year development scale?
Oh my gosh. Well, if I knew that, I'd probably be doing that job. But let's try and tackle it nonetheless. That's because it's a massively difficult problem because their incentive structure is very different. I'll tell you, I won't say who it was or where, but I was talking to a professor who had some cool nanotechnology. And of course, the thing with nanotechnology is like, what are you going to do with it? You could do anything. You could make a cosmetic from it. You could make a pesticide. You could, new electronic parts, whatever. It's just, who knows? So we had an idea, and I said, so how much would it take for you to go and just validate that this is a use, that this could be a use for the technology? And so she gave me a quote of like $75,000, and it would take about 6 months. And so I started asking questions like, well, why $75,000? And she says, well, I need to buy supplies. And I said, don't you already have all the supplies back in the lab right now? She's like, okay, good point. And then I said, well, so what else? She said, well, I need to hire a postdoc. And I said, well, is this the kind of thing, like, for instance, could you just go back to the lab this evening and do this experiment? And like, couldn't you actually get the results this evening? She's like, yeah, good point. But this isn't interesting to me. I'm trying to support my research program. So this is a whole other topic that I'm going to be talking about in the near future. But like, how do you work with academic founders and partners? The risk factor being they're already running a business. They're already running a business that manufactures graduated students and publications and prestige, right? Those are the things that it's manufacturing. So if you're working with someone who's in that business, can they separate what they're doing from this other business? Or will it always be that this business has to trump the other? It's very strange. I've talked to so many researchers who had a system that they wanted to commercial, or that we were thinking of commercializing. And they said, but the only way that I'm going to do this is if someone gives me $300,000 for 3 years for research because we need to do some R&D to take this product forward. And I'm telling you, why is it always $300,000 in 3 years? And it has to do with how much it costs to get a postdoc. So it has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do with them needing to run their business. So there would have to be a really fundamental recognition that they're playing two different games, that there's two different types of activities going on, and the one isn't subordinate to the other.
We have another question from Dr. Zhu. I heard that investors prefer B2C startups and are often not in favor of B2G, government to, or business to government. Is that true? Any suggestions for B2G startup to talk with investors?
Yes. So first of all, just it's important to recognize that there's all kinds of investors who are interested in all kinds of things. And so, there's a lot of people out there who want to make generalizations. So for instance, I would say in the model I just shared, if there was an investor who was like, oh, I actually think it's really easy to change mindset, they might put that at the top of the hierarchy because it's a gradient of like what's hard to change. So I'm giving you a model and some understanding of how to use it, but there's people all over the place who will invest for all kinds of reasons. The thing that everyone's gonna have in common is they want to understand market engagement and how difficult it is to acquire customers. So why would someone be a little leery of a B2G business? Because there can be enormous risk in acquiring a government customer. There could be enormous risk in maintaining a government customer. So if you were able to, so there's two ways you could address this. You could show how you're going to manage all those risks, like how you're going to, like for instance, you're going to lock in a 20-year contract with a government agency. That might be good. But also they might be skeptical because you've never done it before. So the other thing to do is go and work with companies that already are great at this. In other words, go find a B2G company and treat the problem you're trying to solve as their problem. Like, how can you help them be successful with their longstanding government customer? Because customer acquisition can be really expensive. And it's one of the things that lays waste to people's best laid plans about startup success, is that they completely underestimate how difficult it is to acquire a customer. So if you can leverage someone else, oh yeah, we already do that. We already sell to them all the time. We're a trusted provider. Oh, great. Tell me, we have this, we're trying to solve this kind of problem. Is there a way that we could put what we do together to make you more competitive and a better supplier to your existing customer or customers? Like, that's an exciting conversation, I think. And then once you have results from that conversation, that's what you talk to investors about.
Thank you very much, Peter.
You're welcome. Great question. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
I have a question, Peter. Great presentation, excellent. I learned a little bit today. So in terms of pitching the presentation, I've seen, some of us, faculty tend to overly do the technical aspect. So when we approach the VC or angel investors, how much of it should we, it seems to me like based on your slides, there's the desirability, feasibility. It seems to me that we should have some customer discovery data to provide them already and do some of our own research, as well as the return investment as opposed to the technical aspect. Is that correct? I mean, I didn't say the specific words, but it seems to me that that's a very difficult presentation, especially for faculty. And I'm wondering if you have any specific templates you can share of successful pitches.
So not templates. So sometimes when people say like people coming from a technical perspective, perhaps like yourself, will say like, well, how can I do this? And I'll say, what is it? It's like, oh, just market. Like, how do I? And it's like, what is this? What is this? The thing is, from a marketing perspective, someone could say, well, why don't you just get in the lab and make something, and he's like, again, what is this? What this is, what these things are, is not fully understanding the complexity of what it is someone does. So saying, like, for instance, I could say, is there a template for creating something new in the laboratory? Or you can say, is there a template for creating a great way of communicating a point to somebody? Now, there are some guidelines, there's some rules. I'd be happy to chat with you in more depth, but it's like one time I had some postdocs ask me to come to a lunch session, a brown bag, and they said, we'd love to have you come and talk and explain how to file patents. I'm like, okay, yeah, we're not, people study for a long time to do that. So there's a lot of depth to this topic, but I would love to chat with you more about it. And what I would say is just what you're taking away from this, exactly right. If you want to communicate to investors that your technology is awesome, show that you have talked to customers about it and they love it. That's all they care about. Now, they might say, hey, I'm a hobbyist. I like to know about the technology. They might ask. It's not that they won't, I'm generalizing, right? But that will make much more of an impact, is to say, we talked to this potential customer, and when we told them what we could do and we showed them the technology, they did this. They came in and they said, how do we get started?
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, so it is 2 o'clock. Thank you, Peter, for sharing your insight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. The Innovation Center is supported by the University of Nevada, Reno. If you would like to become a member, there's a link on the website, or it's also in the chat room, so you can find more information about our facility and membership. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list for future talks, send us an email. We'll put you on our mailing list. We hope that you'll join us again for future speaker events. And thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.